It's 1986. You're standing on a gravel path in the middle of a forest in Portugal. There are no fences, no guardrails, just you, thousands of other fans, and the open road. You hear it before you see it, a high-pitched scream tearing through the trees. It sounds like a fighter jet and a chainsaw had a baby. Suddenly, the crowd in front of you parts like the Red Sea. For a split second, a monster of plastic and metal flashes past, just inches from your face. It's flying sideways, spitting fire, kicking up a hurricane of dirt and rocks. It's a 600 horsepower bomb, and the driver is just hoping he can keep it from exploding. This wasn't racing. It was a spectacle of pure, beautiful, terrifying insanity. This was Group B, and it was the greatest and most dangerous era motorsport has ever and will ever see. In the early 1980s, rallying was arguably the toughest, most demanding motorsport on the planet. But it had an image problem. It wasn't exactly cool. The cars competing in the top class, Group 4, were basically your dad's road car after a 6-month gym binge and a whole lot of steroids. A Ford Escort, a Fiat Abarth, a Renault 5. Awesome machines, but you could still see the humble family car underneath, all the decals and wide arches. Then Audi showed up with a cheat code, a game-changing piece of tech called all-wheel drive. Their Quattro was a German brute that stuck to slippery surfaces like a blowfly to a sheep's anus. It just loved getting dirty. In the other corner, you had the Italian artists at Lancia, the masters of lightweight rear-wheel drive monsters that looked as good as they went. But the sport's governing body, the FIA, had a serious case of F1 envy. They saw the glamour, the big money sponsors, and the global TV audiences of Formula One, and they wanted in. Rallying needed to be bigger, louder, and more spectacular. So they sat down and created a new rule book, a set of regulations called Group B. It was less of a book and more of a pamphlet, with most of the pages ripped out. The rules were so loose, they were basically a dare. It was Pandora's box with a V8 engine, and the FIA was about to hand every car company in the world the key. So, what exactly was in this Pandora's box the FIA opened? It all came down to one magic number, 200. In the old days, to go racing, you had to build and sell 400 road legal versions of your car. But for Group B, the FIA slashed that number to just 200. This meant you no longer had to base your race car on your mum's grocery getter. You could now design a fire-breathing monster from the ground up, and then just build a handful of barely legal road versions to make the paperwork legit. It was a loophole. The size of body positivity Lizzos, but bank account. This led to the first great philosophical showdown of the era. Brute force versus finesse. Germany versus Italy. In the German corner, you had the Audi Quattro, a four-wheel drive beast with a turbo that spooled up with all the subtlety of celebs dropping their next crypto. In the Italian corner, you had the Lancia 037. It was beautiful, feather light, and only powered its rear wheels. On paper, it was like bringing a beautifully crafted stiletto, single white female style, to a gunfight. But Lancia's team boss, Cesare Fiorio, was a strategic genius. He knew he couldn't beat the Quattro on the slippery stuff. So, He played the system. They focused on tarmac rallies where their lightweight car had the advantage, used every trick in the book, and somehow, in 1983, the nimble Lancia snatched the manufacturer's championship. It was a real-life Moneyball moment. They couldn't out-muscle their opponent, so they outsmarted them. It was the last time a two-wheel drive car would ever win the World Rally Championship. Lancia had won the battle, but all they'd really done was piss off the Germans and give a bunch of other car companies a very, very dangerous idea. The real arms race was about to begin. Lancia's 1983 victory was a classic underdog story, but all it really did was wake up a sleeping giant from France. Enter Peugeot, led by a sharp, ruthlessly efficient dude named Jean Todt. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he's the same guy who later masterminded Michael Schumacher's reign of terror at Ferrari. Yeah, that guy. He didn't show up to make friends. He showed up to build an empire. His weapon of choice? The Peugeot 205 T16. It took the Quattro's four-wheel drive, combined it with a mid-engine layout like the Lancia, and basically created a go-kart with a rocket engine. Suddenly, the game wasn't about clever tactics anymore. It was a straight-up technological arms race that would make Elon and Sam blush. Horsepower figures started climbing from 300 to over 400. Engineers were using space-age materials like Kevlar, because you need your cars fast and bulletproof. These weren't just cars anymore. They were rolling science experiments with one purpose: to defy physics. And the drivers trying to control these things? They weren't human. They were demigods. You had guys like Audi's Walter Röhrl, a German genius so precise he could probably parallel park a jumbo jet. He was one of the few who openly said the cars were getting too crazy. Then there was his teammate, the absolute legend, Michèle Mouton. She wasn't just the most successful woman in rally history, she was one of the fastest, period. A trailblazer with a lead foot. And for pure, unfiltered chaos, you had Peugeot's Ari Vatanen, a Finnish madman who only had one setting, absolutely flat out. Vatanen was famous for two things: winning and having crashes so huge it put Lizzo's bank account to shame. By 1985, the sport was a full-blown war between Audi, Lancia and Peugeot. The cars were getting faster, the crowds were getting bigger, and the drivers were being treated like rock gods who cheated death for a living. The spectacle was bigger than anyone had ever imagined, but everyone in the paddock knew they were writing checks that their butts couldn't cash.
Son, your ego is writing checks your body can't cash.
If the last few years were an arms race, then 1985 and 86 were the part where everyone starts pushing the big red buttons. This was the absolute peak of the cray-cray. Audi, still salty about losing, rolled out the Sport Quattro S1 E2, a car that looked less like a car and more like a snowplow that had been crossbred with a fighter jet. It had wings so big. Well, you know where this is going. It put Lizzo's fans to shame. And it made her sound like God shredding an electric guitar. Not to be outdone, Lancia unleashed the Delta S4. This thing was a different kind of monster. It had a supercharger and a turbocharger. That's like putting a rocket on top of another rocket. It basically eliminated the dreaded turbo lag, giving the driver access to all 500 plus horsepower all the time. Its 0 to 60 time on loose gravel under 3 seconds. A Bugatti would struggle to do that on a perfect paved road. But the cars were only half the story. The other half? The crowds. And they seemed to have a collective death wish. They didn't stand behind fences. There often weren't any. They stood in the middle of the road, forming a human tunnel. A sea of bodies that would part like Moses was at the wheel just seconds before the car arrived. It was a weekly game of chicken between thousands of fans and a 600 horsepower missile. The drivers had no choice but to mentally block them out. Walter Röhrl famously said, "You had to think of them as trees, not people. If I thought they were people, I would have to lift." It was a perfect, terrifying spectacle. A golden age of demigod drivers, monster machines, and insane fans. Rallying was more popular than ever, but everyone knew they were flying way too close to the sun. Flying too close to the sun is great, right up until the moment your wings melt. And in 1986, the wax started dripping. The party had been raging for 4 years straight, but the hangover was about to hit. And it was brutal. It started in Portugal, at a rally famous for having the biggest and craziest crowds. The unthinkable happened. A Ford RS200 lost control and plowed directly into a sea of fans. 3 people were killed and more than 30 were injured. The top teams, horrified, pulled out of the rally immediately. There were gruesome stories of people finding remnants of fans caught in the grills of the cars. The writing wasn't just on the wall, it was written in blood. But incredibly, the season continued. 2 months later, the championship moved to the island of Corsica for the Tour de Corse, a nightmare of a rally known as the Rally of 10,000 Corners. And at the front of the pack was the era's brightest star, a Finnish prodigy named Henri Toivonen. He was the one driver who seemed to have truly mastered the monstrous Lancia Delta S4. If anyone could tame these beasts, it was him. He was leading the rally, setting impossible times, and then nothing. He and his co-driver, Sergio Cresto, simply vanished from the timing sheets. When the next car came through, all they saw was smoke. Toivonen's Lancia had plunged off the side of a remote mountain road into a ravine. It exploded in a fireball so intense that it incinerated the entire car, leaving only a blackened, twisted space frame. There were no skid marks, no witnesses, just a sudden, violent end. The crash in Portugal had been a terrifying warning. The death of Henri Toivonen was a kill shot. He was the sport's ultimate hero, driving its most advanced car, and in a flash, he was gone. The spectacle had finally and tragically consumed its brightest star. This was a moment that no one, not even the FIA, could ignore. Within hours of Toivonen's crash, the party was officially over. The FIA president, Jean-Marie Balestre, didn't form a committee or schedule a think tank. He basically held an emergency press conference and killed Group B on the spot. Effective from the 1987 season, the monster cars were outlawed. Just like that, the most exciting, popular, and insane era in rallying was ended with a press release. But legends don't just disappear. The cars, now forbidden idols, went on to absolutely dominate the few places still crazy enough to let them run. They found a second life, smashing records at the Pikes Peak hill climb in America and in the brutal, door-banging world of European rallycross. The World Rally Championship, of course, became much safer. And that's a good thing. But any fan who was there, who stood on the side of the road and felt one of those machines tear past, will tell you that the sport lost its soul that day. The danger was gone, but so was some of the magic. And make no mistake, we will never see anything like it again. The modern world, with its focus on safety, lawsuits, and control, simply wouldn't allow it. Group B was a beautiful, terrifying, perfect mistake. A brief, shining moment when the monsters were real. The drivers were gods, and the sport was completely, utterly, and gloriously unhinged.